Welcome back, Geico Outkick Studio. We're breaking down college football as I just teased that we would, and there's a lot of college football stories out there. If you love college football, and I know a huge number of our listeners do, and certainly I do as well, I put up a several thousand-word piece every Sunday morning. First thing I do, get out of bed, head straight to the computer, and write for several hours. It's called the Starting 11, where I basically break down what I think are the 11 biggest stories coming out of every weekend in college football. And right off the top, what I want to say is I got to give a lot of credit to the SEC because we've seen all of the drama surrounding the positive tests in the NFL so far, and I feel like I need to knock on wood furiously here. The SEC has managed to return and has played every game. So they've played 14 games, 7 in week 1, 7 in week 2. We haven't yet had any issues arise. And I know that if they can get through this week and the next week, they'll feel really good because they still have a bunch of bye weeks built in where they could theoretically be able to adjust on the fly as necessary. But again, I feel like I need to knock furiously on wood. So far, that hasn't been necessary. We haven't had any games that need to be rescheduled in the SEC so far. They have had 14 scheduled, and they've gotten 14 in. So that's a positive right off the top. The larger context here, the biggest story I thought coming out of what I will call major week 2 in college football, I know some teams have been playing longer, is the Big 12 is a mess. And Oklahoma in particular has started off 0-2 in the Big 12 for the first time since 1998. And congratulations to Iowa State. The celebration was amazing to see in Ames. I know we have a lot of listeners in Iowa, probably some Iowa State fans listening to us right now. Been 60 years since Iowa State beat Oklahoma in Ames. So they've only beaten them, I think, 7 times in the history of the two programs. So this doesn't happen very often, although it started to happen more frequently with Matt Campbell as the coach. And if you remember, Iowa State started the season in a very disappointing fashion with a loss against Louisiana, but they have bounced back in a big way. The bigger issue here, though, is Oklahoma, which I don't know if the luster is starting to come off of Lincoln Riley, but because the honest truth was we thought, I think everybody did at this point, that based on how good Baker Mayfield and Kyler Murray and Jalen Hurts had all been back-to-back-to-back, that Oklahoma was just a juggernaut and they were never going to actually miss a step, even as they broke in new quarterbacks. And Spencer Rattler, even on this show, Joel Klatt told us that he had the ability to make throws that, frankly, most college quarterbacks did not, and he expected him to hit the ground running. And it's not really fair to put it on Spencer Rattler. He wasn't perfect, but the defense has been the real issue with Oklahoma here. And they now have lost 2 in a row. You combine that with Texas going on the road and losing. Sorry, they lost at home, I think, right, to TCU. I mean, all of this has put the Big 12 in a major quandary. The only undefeated Big 12 team left is Oklahoma State. And we know already how wacky at times Mike Gundy and Oklahoma State can be on a week-to-week basis. If I had to bet right now, I would say whoever wins the Big 12 is going to end up with 2 losses, and I think there's a very good chance the Big 12 is going to miss the playoff this year. If that happens, it will be 15 years since the Big 12 has won a national championship, and the conference will continue to be 0-5 in the college football playoff. They have never won a college football playoff game. And so that is a major issue for Oklahoma and Texas going forward. It's a positive, however, if you are a Big Ten fan, if you are a Notre Dame fan potentially, if you're a Miami fan, if you're an SEC fan, or maybe if you're a Pac-12 fan, although I find it hard to believe that anybody from the Pac-12 is going to get in at 7-0 when you've got SEC teams playing 11 games, when you've got Big 12 and ACC teams playing 11 games. I think that's going to be a challenge for the College Football Playoff Committee. But I do think the Big 12 is close to playing itself out of the playoff, all right? So that is big picture story there. In the ACC, we got 3 undefeated teams, Notre Dame, Clemson, and Miami. Clemson just looked okay in their performance against Virginia. Very even on rushing yards, not a lot of movement one way or the other in that extreme, in that situation. So I'm curious to see whether Miami is ready for prime time, because the Hurricanes, the U has looked like they were back a few times before, and then it hasn't really happened. Are they able to really go toe-to-toe with Clemson? And what's Trevor Lawrence going to be capable of when he really has to step up against a high-caliber opponent? Right now, there are only 2 top 25 teams on Clemson's schedule. Notre Dame, well, they'll be on the road in November, I believe, and then also this game against Miami. So that's the ACC picture by and large. North Carolina, by the way, and Mac Brown sort of hanging out there on the fringes. We'll see what exactly ends up happening with them. SEC, where we've got a lot of different games going on. How about Mississippi State? You talk about penthouse to the outhouse in the space of 7 days. Last Monday, we talked with Mike Leach about his big win over LSU and how amazing KJ Costello was, throwing for over 600 yards. This Monday, we're talking about Arkansas coming on the road and beating Mississippi State to get their first win, Arkansas's first win. Congrats to all the Razorback fans out there listening. Arkansas's first win since October 28th, 2017 in the SEC. And if you're sitting around and you're thinking, oh my God, October 28th, 2017, if you're trying to put that into context when that happened, October 28th, 2017, Brett Bielema was still the head coach. They won on the road in Oxford. That was a pretty incredible amount of time to lose 20 straight games. Want to give props to Sam Pittman, the head coach, to Barry Odom, the defensive coordinator, because basically what Barry Odom did was he said, we're not going to allow Mississippi State to beat us deep. We're going to make them throw underneath every time. We're always going to be deeper than the deepest man, and we're going to rely on the fact that they're not going to consistently make the right play. And they threw 3 interceptions. They had 4 turnovers. And Arkansas went on the road as a 17 or 18-point underdog and pulled off a big upset the week after Mississippi State went on the road and pulled off a big upset. Now, I mentioned penthouse to the outhouse. The end result is Mississippi State is exactly where you would have believed they were going to be before the season started. Most people would have expected that they were going to lose to LSU and beat Arkansas. Instead, they beat LSU and lost to Arkansas, which is, again, a wild and wacky thing that sometimes happens with the way that offense is brought to bear in the spread offensive attack that Mike Leach runs. Couple of other big things. Auburn. Auburn is now 3-13 in their last 16 against Georgia. Put another way, the Georgia Bulldogs own Auburn. It's the South's oldest rivalry. Georgia came out and kicked Auburn right in the teeth, and they left me sitting here wondering, why in the world did I believe in Auburn football at all? Auburn got dominated on the line of scrimmage. Bo Nix in his second year doesn't look much different than he did in his first year. The Gus Bus, as Auburn fans like to call the Gus Malzahn offense. I mean, I tweeted that it had no wheels and it was on fire. Dub, you are a big Auburn fan. You're also an Auburn grad. What in the world is going on with Auburn football?
Well, we can't really do much of anything, it seems. Our defense is not nearly as good as it has been in recent years. And our offense, we have Chad Morris now calling the plays, and the offense is, trying to become more pass-centric, it seems, rather than run-based. And the run's not working, the pass ain't working. Bo Nix, it seems, has an extreme inability of staying in the pocket. It's so frustrating watching because he takes the snap, it waits about a second, maybe 2, and then runs to the right as fast as he can.
He has not progressed, I think it's fair to say, relative to what you would have hoped. If you go back in time to when Auburn was playing in September of last year, for instance, and Bo Nix hits the big touchdown pass to beat Oregon, Justin Herbert, who we talked about, looks incredible. By the way, if I'm an Oregon fan, I'm watching Justin Herbert play in the NFL, and I'm saying, why is this dude better in the NFL than he was in college? I mean, I think that's a fair question. He seems to be getting a lot better coaching with the Chargers than he did with the Ducks. But you wouldn't expect that Bo Nix would still be the exact same player this year as basically he was last September.
Yeah, there has been no progression, it seems. And looking at the numbers, 216 total yards and no touchdowns in a game against a team like Georgia, and really against any team. That's not going to win you any games.
So Georgia has now served notice, by the way. They're a couple of touchdown favorites over Tennessee in terms of that game. That line seems steep to me, but it's kind of hard to judge Tennessee, which found a way to win against South Carolina, then looked pretty dominant against Missouri. And this is a crazy stat for you. Tennessee, who was left for dead last year when Tennessee lost to begin the season to Georgia State and to BYU to start 0-2, everybody was throwing dirt on Jeremy Pruitt's coaching grave. And then something crazy happened. Tennessee has now won 8 football games in a row, 6 in the Southeastern Conference. That's their longest consecutive Southeastern Conference winning streak in 20 years. That also is right now the longest winning streak in major conference college football, Power 5 football, in the entire nation. And now the question is Tennessee, now that they've beaten, the South Carolinas, the Missouris, the Vanderbilt, the Kentuckys of the world, are they ready to go to the next level and prove that they can compete for an SEC East title with the likes of Georgia and Florida? That's what we're going to kind of see on this Saturday coming up. It's the CBS game of the week. I like Tennessee to cover that 14. I think they have a really talented rush attack. Ty Chandler, Eric Gray, running back. Jared Garantano, very wobbly, but I like the offensive line talent. I think they've got the hay in the barn, so to speak, on the offensive and defensive lines to be able to compete with all the talent that Georgia has. And there may be some weather issues. I hate to be weather guy, but that makes you think it's going to be kind of a muddy, low-scoring game. I'm intrigued to see what happens in that one because right now, Dub, we're down to only 4 undefeated teams in the SEC after only 2 weeks. I don't think anybody would have predicted that. Florida, Georgia, Alabama, all 3 undefeated. And then we've got hanging out there in the 4th spot undefeated Tennessee. That's it. So we only have right now 4 undefeated teams in the SEC. And again, if you're a Big Ten fan, if you're a Pac-12 fan, if you're an ACC fan, the more teams lose, the more difficult it becomes for the College Football Playoff Committee. And given the fact that Tennessee's going on the road against Georgia, you know that at least one of those teams is going to lose. You're going to be down to 3, boom, pretty fast. Now, Georgia then plays against Alabama, so another one of those teams are going to lose. Heck, in a couple of weeks, you're going to be down to potentially just 2 undefeated teams in the SEC, and we'll see how it plays out from there. But this is a storyline certainly that is worth following. Other storylines that I thought are out there, I really firmly believe that Kyle Trask should be the favorite right now to win the Heisman Trophy. That's how good I believe that Kyle Trask has been playing. He had a bunch more touchdown passes. He's now got 10 through 2 weeks. He's going to have a big game this weekend against Texas A&M, and that is the other part of this story. Texas A&M is paying Jimbo Fisher $7.5 million a year. They're not getting their money's worth right now. Alabama averaged 16.1 yards per pass attempt against Texas A&M on Saturday. They got behind the defensive backs for Texas A&M over and over and over again. Alabama hung 50 on them. And as a result, it doesn't look like Jimbo Fisher, at least to me so far, is cutting very much into that distance between Alabama and Texas A&M. It's now been 8 years, by the way, since Texas A&M beat Alabama. Alabama has won 8 consecutive games in this series since Johnny Manziel pulled off the upset. And it looks like Alabama is quite a bit head and shoulders above anybody else in the SEC West right now. In fact, you can make the argument that Alabama may be the best team in the SEC, but you can make the argument that we've reversed back into the 1990s in the SEC, where the next 3 best teams in the SEC may well be Georgia, Florida, and Tennessee, which was the case in the SEC for many years back in the day. So we'll see whether or not that actually holds true. But for a long time, the SEC West had been better than the SEC East. I'm not sure that that's true anymore, particularly at the top of these divisions. And so I'll come through. When we come back, I'll give you my Outkick top 10. I'll also let you know how I think the SEC is shaking out. And we'll talk a little bit more about the NFL as well. I appreciate all of you hanging out with us.